Okay, everyone out there in our film roundtable community, here we come at you with another episode. Um, Here we have a very old friend of mine, Mr. Callum Greene, who is coming to us from New Zealand. Personally, this is probably the furthest hookup we've had. Callum, I want to thank you for being able to join us. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
This means a lot to us here in the filmmaking community. As you know, we've had some producers on and people keep emailing us and saying, hey, we really like to see some more producers to understand that process and hear from them. As everyone knows, out in the film roundtable community, this came together and started because of the COVID lockdown, getting a lot of filmmakers together just to talk about our community, our organization, and in a lot of ways to demystify the process for young filmmakers on, how to get into the business. So as always, we need to pay some respects to what this pandemic is currently up to for all of us. And as of this recording, we are at 1.3 million deaths worldwide and 245,000 deaths in the United States alone. So that's something for us all to always think about and keep in our mind and our hearts as we move forward. As always, let's just hold a moment of silence here in the virtual space because of the COVID pandemic. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. That means a lot to us, the people who put this together and the people who follow us, so that we always make sure we're acknowledging, what's going on out there. And also everyone to know, if you want to catch up with the filmroundtable.org, you can see all of our back episodes as well as our YouTube channel. And what's become very popular as of late, because we're all starting to get back to work and be mobile, is the podcasts that exist on Spotify and iTunes. Always a great way to hear these conversations. So without further ado, a very old friend of mine, Mr. Callum Greene, is here with us. A little quick backstory on my connection to Callum as we get started in here, which is going to be a little food for thought for all of you young filmmakers when I keep saying, just always surround yourself with the people who you see want to do this as you do. Callum and I met, I believe, in 1995. There was a movie called Laying Low. I had answered an ad for PAs to come work for free. I had decided that I wanted to, Callum shaking his head like, really? Who put that ad where? And the first, I knew nothing about being a PA. I knew I wanted to learn about the film business. So the actual first person I met when I showed up there, someone had me walk around with this guy who was carrying a very beat up metal clipboard. And this was Callum Greene, who was the second AD on the show. Were you not, my friend?
Correct. That is correct. Yeah.
I wonder. So Danny Liner, rest his soul, he just passed away last year, was a director who became better known for Dude, Where Is My Car? And Harold and Kumar Go to the White Castle, became a big comedy guy. But he was a New York indie guy out of the, the Hal Hartley school. And Callum, tell me about, it was interesting that you and I met on that job. So how much do you remember about that job?
I remember it was a key one for me because it was sort of the first one I'd done with that sort of posse of independent filmmaking companies that were sort of, the way we got our head start, Shooting Gallery and Killer Films and Open City and Double A and all these sort of like Good Machine. They were all sort of kicking around doing movies with these, new directors at the time. And I remember I just arrived in the States from London the year prior with this dream of trying to get into independent filmmaking and somehow make it work. And there was all these opportunities if you were willing to sort of come in and earn your stripes, work free, or deferred, I think they called it.
They called it deferred. That was exactly. I was like, oh, I'll get paid later, no problem.
Deferred payment never happened. So I'd done a couple of things, and on that particular movie, I have no idea. I think I had done a few commercials as an AD, and got called in to meet actually to get the job as first AD on that project, and came in and sat with Danny and his producers, who saw through me in about 5 seconds. Just, what are you doing in this room? And on the way out, Danny came running out and grabbed me, and he said there was something he liked, and said, if we go another direction, i.e. hire someone who can do the job, would you still be interested in maybe, second ADing or still being part of the team? Like he just said, you sounded like you were enthusiastic and passionate, and we might go with someone who actually has some skills, but would you still be into it? And I said, absolutely, I'd love to do it. So they called me up a little bit later and said, would you, take the position as a second? And I was like, absolutely. And so it was a fantastic experience. Actually, I think that was my first feature ever. Yeah, I think it was. And off the back of that, met a couple of people who then furthered, that's a whole other story. But yeah, that's how I ended up there, working the shooting gallery, deferred payment. And I remember meeting you and a couple of the other PAs and being like impressed that you had your wits about you and knew what you were doing. And I think similar to myself, and to those people starting off, just whatever it was that was asked of you, you did it to the best of your ability, 100%, smile on your face, let's get this done, part of the team. And I think you don't ever quite know where you're going, where your trajectory is going. And it's a wise move to just do that, because the people above you see that, recognize that energy and recognize that skill set. And even if you don't know how to AD a movie, if they see someone who's competently trying to do a street lockup or handle an actor or pass out coffees, when their opportunity arises. And that's what happened to me. There was a wardrobe PA who was a little older than all of us by about, I would say, a decade, and a little bit more chop. And she, so I think a few people found her a little bit rougher to deal with. Whereas I just thought she was doing, her job. I was pleasant to her as I was to everyone. And lo and behold, she turned out to be someone who didn't need the job, had decided to just try filmmaking, super successful millionaire, and invited me to dinner 3 months later to meet a couple of producers who were in trouble with a film that they were doing, a little $150,000, $200,000 movie, and needed a production manager. And lo and behold, she just like, this guy's capable, got on with everyone, did his job. Same thing that I saw in you, she saw in me. And suddenly I was production managing my first film. And I did not have the resume for that, but that feeling of confidence that she had seeing me run the set or working with the actors and having some diplomacy and tact got me that first production manager gig. And from there, my second, and from there to line produce, and from there to produce, and on and on and on. So if it hadn't been for her, it wouldn't have happened. But of course, if it hadn't been for the method with which I approached the movie itself, I don't think it would have happened. And I think the same was true when I met you. We were just like, let's get this done. We're excited. We're enjoying this. And to this day, here I sit, I think we probably had 30 people on that crew. And, my show right now has over 2,000 people. And I still notice every time someone is got a smile on their face, is tackling something aggressively, even if they don't know how to do it, asking good questions, clearly wants to be there, then the next month when there's an opening or something else, and I'm like, I wonder if that person could be good. And that's how it flows. It's still, your attitude means everything. And also just be diplomatic and solid and humanitarian to everyone you work with, because you do not know who's going to be the multimillionaires who doesn't need to be there, but is just doing it, and because it will be noticed. And the reverse is true. If you're, if I catch anyone on Words with Friends, it's just, pick up a broom, go do something, make yourself busy. It'll be noticed. But yeah, laying low. Young Danny Liner, I think 21-day shoot, something like that.
Something very tiny like that. All I remember is I was there for like 3 days. I had no idea what a PA was, and 3 days later, you made me the key PA, and I was like, okay, yeah, I can do this, man. Whatever it takes, I mean, I was bartending at the same time, trying to pay my bills, and then working for free. And then I'll never forget, Danny Liner, like a week later, was like, you know what ADs do? I'm like, not really, man. I'm kind of new here, but I like all this. He's like, should hang around the ADs. I think you'd be like a good one. You got a good personality for that. So it's exactly what you're saying. It's like, just be yourself, be hungry, be energetic. And that's always going to shine through. And that's what this business always needs. And that's really how, in lots of ways, the cream rises to the top. I mean, I didn't it's so funny because I actually went and on IMDb and looked at the Laying Low credit list. There's like 20 people on there. You and I are not on there. You know, it's like Jim Deneau, who was the DP at the time, who's like now a very well-known DP in like, you know, he does a lot of these like limited series and streamer things, but it was literally like 10, 12 people were on that list. A lot of, you know, people who've gone on to become successful, but who are not on that list, which is very interesting. But you're absolutely right. And then that's the way that's one thing that we always try and tell people who are trying to break into this business is it's really, you know, really just kind of be hungry and be willing to be there. And that's always going to shine through. I mean, one thing I didn't get into with everyone, in case they don't know you, is say what you have been up to lately. Obviously, we can't talk about where you are now. Let's just say it's not in the U.S. and he's got 2,000 people working for him. But tell us what the project was before this that everyone will know, so they understand this huge jump that you've made, and then we'll talk about how you got there.
Sure. Yeah, with a few zeros added. So the last film I did was Star Wars 9, JJ's final Star Wars. So I was on that for about a little over 4 years. And so I've gone from doing 4 movies a year to 1 movie every 4 years is how I look at it.
That's what they call climbing the ladder.
It's still the same job. It's crazy how it all boils down to the same thing. And but yeah, so that was a crazy big movie, very different from Laying Low. I would hazard a guess that the entire budget of Laying Low would have paid for about half a day of shooting Star Wars.
Or just fact, that's probably true. Probably just a crafty setup, really.
Oh yeah. It gets ridiculous. And so yeah, that movie, that's sort of the night and day. And I sort of determined that would be the last big crazy movie that I would do. And all I can say about this one is this is another big crazy one, but television. So I'm still learning, and that for me is the personal drive continually, is to continue to learn. And it sort of has been the process as I've gone through the ranks. It's to learn and learn and learn and learn. And at this juncture, yeah. So try to finish these bigger projects out, and then weirdly enough, now hankering to get back into what I was doing before, back into the indie world and back into developing my own projects and getting that stuff going, something with a little bit more personal connection to it. But yeah, in between has been a fun journey, and yeah, that was a fun, crazy project for sure.
Well, the always learning is a big thing, and that's one thing, you know, I always say as well. It's like, and the one beautiful thing in lots of ways about what we do, right? And for the most part, every project is different. Almost every day is different. Every group is different. So there's a constant evolving sense of how to approach the job, which keeps it fresh, you know. And the thing is, it's very interesting. I mean, for talking about your career specifically, because you know, you were very well established in the low budget type of indie world. I actually distinctly remember working on reshoots with you with a De Niro movie called Everybody's Fine, and having a dinner with you, and you literally saying, you know, you were about to travel and start working, I believe it was with Guillermo, right? On the next thing. So how did you personally make that jump? Was it all just, you know, meeting somebody, or what was that jump to become like a well-established indie guy to now, you know, get into a big realm studio movie?
I think I wish I could say it was all a predetermined plan. I think I was craving to just do new stuff and work with as many people as I could and learn stuff. And so had a great 15 years in New York, and probably the biggest stretch I had was 7 years with Sofia Coppola, and did a couple of her movies, and then, you know, Michael Almereyda, of course, who, you know, which was a awesome New York indie track to tread, but also Michel Gondry and Ang Lee and a bunch of other people. And it came to a point where I was doing Marie Antoinette with Sophia in Paris in 2005, and it was my first sort of big studio picture. It was a negative pickup with Sony, and we did a good job, and I got a call with regards to would I be interested in going to LA, and Sony were interested. Basically, I think what they wanted to do was pick my brain and methodology for applying low budget techniques to bigger budget projects. So my first studio picture was a picture called Vantage Point with a British director, Pete Travis, and a really great ensemble crew of actors that we had a $80 million price tag, and I was able to put that together for half that. And that became appealing. So I just took my skill set of taking every project on its own merit, a bespoke approach, and really whittling it down and starting from the ground up. And so that was the first movie I sort of got into on the studio level, and did a few in and around that range. I was working with Original Films, Neil Moritz's company, and did 2 or 3 projects with his that happened and 2 or 3 that didn't. And again, it's interesting you bring it up. I was working on a version of Escape from LA, a sort of Escape from New York remake. And we were looking, again, it was like a budget of $200 million, and they were trying to bring it down for 100, let's say. So took the same approach and applied it and figured out, well, actually, if we could go to Connecticut and get the look and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, delivered this. And unbeknownst to me, there were several interested parties in that, including New Line and Warner Brothers. So cut forward 2 years later, they were putting names together for Del Toro and Peter Jackson to interview and meet. And sort of on a wild card, the people at New Line remembered my approach to that movie that never happened. And again, I just had gone in every day, even when it looked hopeless, and fought the good fight and presented a way of cracking the puzzle and a solution, and been friendly to everyone. And lo and behold, like, the executive that I'd worked with was junior, was suddenly now senior. And she was like, well, would you ever be interested in something really large that we're trying to do in a controlled fashion? And wouldn't tell me what the project was, but I was like, of course. So I got on a long list that became a short list. And I just kept feeling if I could get a meeting. And meanwhile, Pete Francioso, as my agent at UTA, was working his magic, which was taking a little meeting at MGM, taking a little meeting at New Line, taking a meeting at Warner Brothers, all the players in this, so that when my name suddenly appeared on this list, everyone sort of knew who I was and could partially take ownership of me being a non-political choice. And I think I would lucked out in terms of timing. If you've been around too much, not that you have a bad reputation, but it can be that people see you as a certain way, and I think that I was just a fresher face on that list. I could be seen to be not Guillermo's person, not Peter's person, not any particular studio's person. And so that interview process took about 7 or 8 months. And in the meantime, I was doing Everybody's Fine with Kirk Jones and De Niro and Drew Barrymore, Kate Beckinsale. I'm trying to think. It was a great little cast. But another sort of indie, fun enough in Connecticut. And it took 7 or 8 months. And finally, after meeting Peter and Guillermo and having a great meeting with them, then I think it was a couple months later, and then I got the call on Everybody's Fine. And that was definitely a game changer. I think I view like Laying Low as one game changer, Lost in Translation, another game changer, and The Hobbit definitely was the next sort of door opener. And suddenly I was in this realm of doing these hundreds of millions of dollars of movies. So that would have been 2009. And then worked with Guillermo for about 7 years, and had a great run with him. And then that led into like all these bigger movies. But it was quite a seismic change.
And it is always interesting because, one thing that I've often spoken about is how, none of us really ever get into this business thinking of it as a career. We can look back 20 years, 25 years later and be like, oh, wow, I have had a career. But it's so much because of the nature of us being gun for hires and how we work, right? I always view it as a series of concentric circles. Like when you start out, your circle's really small, and then it gets bigger the more you work, and then it gets bigger the more you work. And eventually you get into this place, where you've got like this Twilight Zone effect in terms of how big your circle is, and then as you said, it's interesting the thing you said about like these decisions you make, particular projects that end up getting chosen for X, Y, or Z people, and the people that you meet there, and that creates this divergent piece of a fork, and so on and so on. So it's like there is no straight line, going from starting to 25 years being over here, right? It's a little bit of this type of a serpentine movement.
Oh, for
right?
sure. Yeah, for sure. And I still remember, I mean, I remember those winters in New York where you would be coming off a project in October and November, just scared about when your next job was. And it was always such a dead time because, those small independent movies rely a lot on run and gun, on being able to go to Chinatown, being able to take advantage of New York as a great location. And they just, they weren't shooting till the spring. And I remember the first year when I had a project that overlapped over the winter, and I sort of thought, yes, I'm in now. This is this is it. I can continually, get working. But it is strange. Yeah, I think the worst thing I see in terms of my compatriots and peers is getting on the phone with you and our contemporaries. The people that are still doing it are still the people that like enjoy it, have a laugh, who get how hard it is, but at the same time are still seeking to learn, are still enjoying solving the puzzles and figuring it out. And there is nothing more satisfying than doing that. And I think personally for me, it's everything from the little things we did on $150,000 movies through to the things we do on $150 million movies, and finding that blend. I would say tech is probably the thing that I've learned the most about in the past 4 or 5 years. I think the politics remains the same regardless of a $100,000 movie or a $200 million movie. Politics, diplomacy, tact, therapy, talking to people, communication. Apply those rules no matter what your project is. 1-day shoot, 100-day shoot, doesn't matter. It's the most important keys. I would say then on top of that, your project will have other weird oddities in terms of what you have to deal with. For me, the learning point that is keeping me going and not becoming some sort of jaded is the tech and everything that we're getting into now with regards to that. And it's super fun to play with those tools and to learn that stuff. But I would say if you find yourself jaded or getting irritated, that will start to affect the core level of those things that we just talked about in terms of diplomacy, tact, communication. It'll seep in and you will not be able to function properly. And you can just tell it. I've seen people getting burnt out. I've seen people getting snappy. I've seen people just the short answer. And it doesn't matter that you've done 10, 20, 30, 40 different projects and are probably right 50% of the time. Hearing just a sharp no or why bother, it's just going to be this, just isn't great for the person who's done 1 movie or 2 movies or 3 movies or is their first movie. Because you do want that dogged determination. You do want that, those people bringing, and it could be the director's first movie and he or she doesn't want to hear like, ugh, why are we bothering talking about it? Let's just jump to the chase. We're never going to get that location, because at the end of the day, you might. And it's not our position to say no in any other scenario other than safety. It's to say how and to figure out what that is, because there's a version, there's always a version. I remember Lost in Translation, my big learning tool, when I'm talking to Sophia, her second movie, we're out in Japan, one of the hardest movies I've ever done in my life. And she wanted a Simon and Garfunkel song to play in the New York bar. And I was like, okay. So I got into it and they came back and said, yes, you can have it. I'm so excited. Great, here we go. And they said, it's $150,000 for the rights. And I was just like, well, that's in our entire music budget. So I went to Sophia and said, no, basically, can't. And she was like, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate, you working so hard and staying up to communicate with LA and figure that out. The next day she came in and said, oh, hey, I talked to Paul, of course, because she knew Paul Simon. And he was like, you can have it for $5,000 or something. And I was like, okay. And I was like, yeah, it's not my job to say no. You never know when someone has a connection or a way. We have a scenario here where it's like we have 5 days on top of a mountain. The only way in there is with helicopters. And it's like, there's no way we can afford it. And the team, that's not how I presented it. I said, here's what could happen. It seems unlikely, but is there another way? And immediately they got together and said, what if we just do it as a vista and a look, and we just do it with visual effects plates, and we do it for one day instead of 10. All of a sudden it becomes completely possible. And there we go. It's not, whilst we have, I always say this about ADs in your job, you have like all of the control and none of the power. Because if the director wants to go again, in case, except for safety, or the sun's really gone. But even then, if the director wants the shot to be black, so you have total control, but no power. And my short stay as an AD was, a brief few movies as an AD. I found that incredibly hard to deal with. And, it amazes me when top-notch ADs such as yourself have that ability to roll with the punches and guide and push things along. And I view the same thing as producing. It's still part of that same brain, and it's still working with that tact and diplomacy to go back. And because you never know when someone knows Paul Simon and can make you look like a fool for saying no. It's just, I did as well as I could do, but maybe there's another option, and then you wait and see.
That's you've said some very profound things there about, the heart and soul and just the determination that we all try and get involved in to help service, people's creative visions. We are part of a team delivering. And oftentimes, and you'll agree with me on this, sometimes we're met with roadblocks and we're able to offer up creative solutions that then become the way to get something done. Right. and that is such an important part of what I do and what you do in terms of ultimately helping a director, a cinematographer, even a writer. You can be like, hey, instead of that scene, how about if it's written over here because we have this? And then they're like, yeah, and before you know it, it's like, that's part of the whole team aspect of getting it done on so many levels.
Absolutely. I think those are the best directors, the ones that are, have that innate stubbornness that makes a good director. You need it because a no is the easiest way to go. And they need to be able to push back and fight. But I think those who do it with a human touch and with compassion are the best, and have that reason. And Del Toro used to come every day, and he'd have his little notebook, and he'd have his little doodles of what we're going to do, and he alone would know what could come off and what wasn't absolutely essential, and that was his information to share, and he would guide us through. And on a good day there would be very few that were not crossed off, and on some days that we didn't, but it's their job to push, and our job's to help. And the best movies are ones you're able to prep properly, because then all these conversations can happen like this, calmly, figure it out, make the calls, think about it, come back. And I think, again, with diplomacy and tact and compassion, if you can push those questions to the forefront every day in prep, they get answered in an equally calm fashion, and it's not aggressive or confrontational. The worst thing comes when that happens on set or the day before, and people feel, as they do in real life, caught out or trapped or put in a position where they now have no choice, and react in an absolutely understandable fashion with frustration and sometimes anger or what have you. But if we're doing our jobs properly, just apply those basic tenets from day one, and try and answer that stuff beforehand. And then hopefully you're dealing with a crew where if something comes up, if you're on a mountain and one of the camera breaks and you only have one camera, that's no one's fault. That's in the lap of the gods. And how do we deal with this now as a team? And I always say it's always better. It's such a difference when you make a second movie with the same team, because you can cut right to the chase, and when someone's like, well, that's a no. Okay, cool. And you can move quickly through this stuff because you trust each other. That's what's important. And a first movie is sort of a relationship. I see it. I'm normally one of the first few people on. So we're doing the dance, we're having the dinners, we're in love. And then, the AD comes on, and you start to see that flirtation going on. And the AD's now suddenly dancing with the director and doing all the stuff and knows more and knows everything the day to day. And then the DP comes on. Then there's a little bit DP AD kind of like jealousy going on. And somewhere within that, a costume designer who's wowing and caught the director's eye. And then you go into the crew and there's suddenly, 50 people, 500 people, whatever it is. And the director is, charging along, and you take a little bit of a back seat, and then you get to post and you're like, okay. And then the editor appears and, oh, you see that relationship building and you're like, oh, I'm getting jealous again. And then by the time of the premiere, hey, let's do another one. But it's this beautiful relationship that you have as you do the dance. And until you've done one, you've got to realize, just don't be jealous, because it's going to happen. And inevitably, for a lot of directors, if there's that person who just keeps saying yes, you're in trouble, because they're going to fall in love with them hard. Whereas you're like being a little too sensible for them. But yeah, the trust of a second movie, it's just such a relief. You're like, okay, you've proven yourself, you've earned your stripes, and that's fantastic.
There's the shorthand. The shorthand, once you start working with a core group over and over again, it just becomes automatic. It just becomes less things need to be said. They're understood. As you said, it's a key proportion of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things I was wondering about, I wanted to ask you about is, and one of the things we talk about often in terms of like helping that next generation, because in a lot of ways, the way we all did it, right, it was pretty much, grab yourself by the bootstraps and go. And now there's a lot more conscious effort going around in the industry about being able to mentor people in certain areas, to understand, to be able to create avenues into this business that haven't always been accessible before, and how do you see that? And what are your thoughts on being able to, for the younger generation to be able to advice that you can give them, or ideas in your own backyard in terms of how to mentor people?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think when we were growing up, there was a big sort of intern / deferred payment scenario, which of course was probably completely illegal.
Yeah.
But in a way, a shame, because that's how we earned our stripes. And I think if it's your choice to go work, and you're not talking 14 months, you're talking a month, 2 months, perhaps. And if that's your choice to do that, I think it should be open. I was lucky enough to go to film school and work a couple of avenues there. But, of my 75 colleagues, I could count in one hand the number of people who are successful. The rest blew that money, and it would have been far better for them to have gone and just taken the same amount of time and tried to work on a couple of independent movies and actually see for themselves, is this for me? Which I think is a very important question. I think the glamorization of film has just increased decade by decade, to a point where, my mother can tell me the budget of every project I've done. And I'm like, this is irrelevant. And who's dating who? And it's become this like very kind of glamorous, sexy life. And it's like, and I can tell you, it's so not. I start my day every day at 4 a.m. and I go way into the night to try and wrestle this beast that I'm on right now. It's exhausting, and it takes it out of you. And if you don't love it, it's like, walk away. So how do you prove yourself to that? I mean, I think film school is not for everyone. Having gone there, I think I can speak to that. And it's hugely expensive in this country. So I would caution, just, it's certain film schools may open certain avenues and others don't. And check with yourself first. Take a moment and figure out, is that the avenue you want to go? And it might be the only avenue you have, depending where you are and where you live. But at the same time, getting a loan isn't real money. So that might be your only avenue. Whereas, real money to be able to afford an apartment and go to New York, or not LA, but New York or Toronto, or somewhere that has a base of independent filmmaking, or, New Orleans, New Mexico, it might be a different route. Atlanta, some of these big hubs that have got stuff going on, and, go and say, okay, instead of going to film school for 3 years or 4 years, I'm going to do 6 months and try and start from scratch. I think there are programs out there. I rarely shoot in the States, so it's hard to speak to what's going on there. But certainly in Great Britain and where I am here now, there's programs through the BFI. I think we had 40 interns on Star Wars, paid positions that were paid half by the BFI and half by us. And that's an ongoing program to encourage the youth of today to get involved at a level that won't bankrupt them. I think we're trying to do a program here where we have 8 paid positions on the show that could rise up and up. And certainly, I'd be all up for having mentoring people out there to get a taste of what's going on, because it is hard and it is tricky and it's not as glamorous as people make out. And I think it's really important for you to be real with yourself in terms of like, is this for me? Is this what I want to do? Particularly if you're not in a craft, if you're not costume, camera, sound, something that has a technicality to it, that you can, know yourself whether you're good at that or want to do that. But in this sort of general production world, it's a little harder. And I think there are ways in which you can try and test yourself. But yeah, I think, look, we're always trying, and certainly I think you and I are at a position in our lives where we can be confident that we're, the 24-year-old where we're bringing on isn't going to take our job the next day, and open that up. And I think it's hugely important to provide a different avenue than people taking on $100,000 worth of loans to go to a film school that might end in the same dead end.
Yeah, that's well put. And and that is something, that, we do have a lot of people out there, as I said, kind of look to us, and we try and demystify the process in lots of ways. Like, there's 24-year-olds out there right now who that's what you and I were doing, 25 years ago. And it's important to show them that if you stick with it, you have the passion to it, you will rise up and create a career. I know, speaking to a lot of kids now, they get very disheartened because a lot of kids in this generation expect things to happen quickly. And it's like, give it time, just work hard. And
it was years before that winter gap disappeared. I mean, got to be 7 years at least of trying to just keep going. And even when, one of my best buddies and yours, Anthony Katagis, and I formed our little company, and we were trying to pay each other $300 or $400 a week and try and scrape through and figure it out. And this, that late 90s, early 2000s, it can take a long time. And I really feel in a way it should. You're earning your stripes and you're building that concentric circle, as I say. And if you're doing that properly, then that circle is solid, and that circle is a base where I think I'm lucky enough. I think that most people within that circle would speak nicely of the work that we can do if we are appropriate for the project at hand. But there's no rushing towards doing it. I think it is good. But I think, again, it's try and get out there, try and get a PA job, try and start from the bottom, suck it up, learn. Again, tact, diplomacy, and compassion with communication. Those are the best tools that you can have, and they're tools you already have. You don't need to have even been on one day of a film set to have those very, very valuable tools. And your first day on a film set, if you bring those to bear, it will be noticed, and it will start to get things going for you.
Well, that's absolutely well said. And Callum, I know we're getting you on a shoot day, so we're going to wrap this up. But I do want to say something to young people out there listening who think that they might be interested in becoming a production manager, a line producer, a producer in the kind of stratosphere that Callum is in. Please go back and listen to these words. You're not going to hear a more thoughtful person lay out the type of way you need to approach the job every day, in order to just climb this ladder. So, Callum, I really appreciate your time with us here today. This has been great. It's been a few months, if people knew, of me trying to track you down so that we could find this slot and time because you're so busy. But thank you for joining us here at the Roundtable, Callum. We really appreciate it.
You're more than welcome, Doug. It was a lovely opportunity to get to chat to you and reminisce. And I wish you luck with the rest of these. It's a fun thing to go listen to and learn from, whether you're driving around or just walking about. And hopefully there's some inspiration there. It is tough, but it is doable. And I think you and I are both testament to that 25 years later. And it was lovely to see you again, my friend.
Great to see you too, my friend.